ring is mine.
Perhaps the most daring thing about the story of The Lord of the Rings is that its Lord fails. Frodo fails, but it's an important lesson to remind us that we all fail at some point in our lives. Some temptations are just too insurmountable, but it is okay to fail if we have people we love who love us. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a deep dive, part 3 of our Lord of the Rings analysis series. Despite winning a record number of Oscars, Return of the King is really at its heart a story about failure and how to handle failure. Failure is something that I've had to deal with, as I originally wanted this video to come out in December, but I foolishly committed to the extended editions of these films. This one is 4 hours and 23 minutes, and I'll be honest with you viewers, this series broke me. It finally happened after 7 years. I finally hit my personal Mount Doom of burnout. But in this process, I learned something so important. And I loved making this video so that I can share it with you. Because you, my dear viewer, you have carried me all the way to this apex. And so here we are, a scene by scene deep dive into 2003's Return of the King. Details you missed, deeper layers of meaning, and really how this is secretly all about how to fail. And failing never feels so good when you're wrapped up in a horseboy shirt. We got them. These horseboy shirts are so fucking sick, and you can grab one of these at nerdriot.shop along with the 2 others in our deep dive collection. Okay, Return of the King opens with, of all images, a wriggling worm pinched between the fingers of the hobbit Sméagol while fishing with his cousin Deagle. We know from Two Towers how much Sméagol's future form of Gollum loves fish. Such a sweet. And one cannot help but feel that every raw and wriggling fish he bites reminds him of this day, his birthday, according to Gandalf in Chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past in Fellowship. Now, of course, Gollum would be an unreliable narrator telling Gandalf that, but he says in the scene that it's his birthday, and we might as well see this memory as Gollum reflecting back on his best birthday ever, or his worst birthday ever. As this scene was originally shot by Fran Walsh for Two Towers, it would have come right as Frodo called Gollum by his hobbit name of Sméagol for the first time in the Dead Marshes, and the camera would have pushed in on his widening eyes. This would have been Andy Serkis's one on-screen appearance in this trilogy, and they shot this scene after loving Serkis's performance so much after he was cast initially just for the voice of Gollum, and later of course to the mocap, and brought so much physicality to the role. And I think it's a mistake to see Sméagol smile at this worm as a clue to some buried sadism that the ring just activates. I think this is just Sméagol's last day of true happiness, and the ring replaces Sméagol's love for simple joys like fishing with an unquenchable thirst for the ring itself. They opened Return of the King with this moment, not to frame the third installment as like a Gollum story, but to show us the real stakes of this battle. Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens depict the ring as a story of addiction, and Sméagol may not know it here, but he is going to be the raw and wriggling victim on the hook, waiting to be devoured. This is how easily the ring can turn us against each other, and anybody who has suffered addiction themselves or has had a loved one suffering from addiction, you know how important it is to embrace failure. Failure is a friend we all know so well. But here today by the river would be the day the ring allows itself to be rediscovered after thousands of years. And since the Two Towers film was really less about the ring and never really showed the ring being used, they wanted Return of the King to remind us of how exactly the ring wormed its way back into history and how horrifying it immediately was. This film opens with the ring's discovery in water, and it ends with its destruction in the fiery cracks of doom, aka Samath Nar, the volcanic fissure where it was forged. The original idea for the opening shot of Return of the King was to glide out of the paths of the dead and then zoom over the plains of Edoras to the Golden Hall where Aragorn would wake up from his nightmare, the returning king seeing a vision of how to make his great return in this film. But by opening with the ring and how destructive it is, the film is instead a story about the darkness we all face. Sméagol's cousin Deagle pulls the ring from the mud and fondles it in his palm. These choir voices' lyrics are the Valinor theme in the language of Quenya, and these translate to the strength, the weapon, the needs, the valiant. Be the ring your weapon, the strength, the weapon, go to victory. And it is absolutely chilling to hear this, and to be matched with Andy Serkis's transformation into Gollum-like speech.
Give us that eagle, my love. It's my birthday, and I want it.
Yes, give us that. I wants it. Already, his soul is fracturing into two. As Sméagol strangles his cousin, the music just drops out, and all we hear is a twisted, wailing sound effect to the ring. And Peter Jackson loved Andy Serkis's strained performance after he kills Sméagol so much that despite the actor Tom Robbins blinking, they actually had Weta artists freeze his eyes open for the whole shot. And Sméagol picks up his precious.
Precious.
Yes, you can hear Sauron whispering the second line of the ring's inscription in Black speech. Ash Nask Gimbatu. One ring to find them. As the ring finds us here, Sméagol vanishes, and he might as well have vanished from all of life itself. We see Sméagol's transformation to Gollum over hundreds of years. Since Andy Serkis's legs were too thick in the shot, they actually had to use VFX to thin them out, and they used VFX to enlarge his eyes in the following shot. His voiceover snarls.
We forgot the taste of bread, the sound of trees. We even forgot our own name.
I love this effect of Sméagol closing his eyes on practical makeup, and then on We Forgot Our Own Name, they open to the fully CGI Gollum form. Yes, we see the moment Gollum buries Sméagol, strangling him the way Sméagol strangled Deagle, and it is all shown in the eyes. And yes, as I pointed out in Two Towers, Sméagol's pupils are open and vulnerable, Gollum's pupils are narrow and hostile, letting in very little light. Bringing us to the present day, where Sam offers Frodo some lembas bread, which we know from the extended edition, but viewers of the theatrical versions might not remember the stomach-filling nibbles of carbs from Lothlorien that blew Merry and Pippin's butts out. Sam doesn't eat, rationing food for the trip home, a trip that Frodo does not expect to make. Gollum later exploits this to suggest that Sam was actually sneaking bites. You'll notice that Gollum wakes them up from their rest, but neither of them had actually slept. I always assumed that Gollum just woke them up randomly as a sleep deprivation tactic to make them weaker and more irritable. This burnt forest that they hike through is actually the slopes of the real New Zealand volcano Ruapehu, which had just had a forest fire that year, resulting in this vegetation being burnt. The victors of Helm's Deep arrive to Isengard, a scene significantly cut down for the theatrical version, which just shows Merry and Pippin getting high on that dank long bottom leaf, and Pippin fighting the Palantir Seeing Stone. But of course, the extended edition had this interaction with Saruman atop the Tower of Orthanc, and Grima Wormtongue stabbing Saruman before he could share some secret intel that Gandalf wanted. And that information was going to be that Denethor would fail them at Minas Tirith. And I do love what causes Grima to turn against Saruman.
What is the house of Rohan but a thatched barn where brigands drink in the reek and our brats roll on the floor with the dogs?
Yes, the prose is just so good. It's just perfectly lovely snobbery coming from the voice of Saruman that was written by Tolkien, in which the voice of Saruman taunts them and tells Theoden to hang himself. And you know what? It is that particular horseboy slander, horse boys unite, that is the greatest insult to Grima, that tells him, I can't take this anymore.
And I hear.
Christopher Lee said that he knew the sound a man would make when he was stabbed in the back from his experiences in combat, and he made the exact gasp that he personally heard on the battlefield. Now, this scene was initially included to make up for Peter, Fran, and Philippa omitting the scouring of the Shire sections from the book, in which, after the ring was destroyed, Saruman leads his legions of orcs to dominate the Shire and occupy it, and Frodo and the rest have to fight to free the Shire. The filmmakers felt the ring's destruction is a more natural cinematic climax, so instead they moved this interaction with Saruman to earlier in Return of the King. But despite Christopher Lee and Brad Dourif's always great performances, when trying to keep the theatrical version's first act clipping along, this scene doesn't quite keep pace or have that kind of logical structure to it. Christopher Lee was reportedly pretty pissed off to be removed from the film, but it's partly why when we go back to these films, we look at the extended editions, because while it would be hard to sit still for 4 hours and 23 minutes in a cinema, for most of us watching these at home, they really are the definitive versions of Peter, Fran, and Philippa's visions. This establishing shot of Edoras is actually in reverse. You can kind of see it from Eowyn's clothes and the banners and the wind, but you know, Mount Sunday's crosswinds blow in every direction. The original shot pulled out from Edoras, and they had to digitally scrub soldiers who were moving in the opposite direction. In the drinking game of the Golden Hall, in the extended edition, behind Legolas are cameos by composer Howard Shore and sound designer Michael Samanek. Gimli toasts,
Ah, yes, the dwarves that go swimming with little hairy women.
Jonathan Rhys-Davies improvised this line as reference to Robert Shaw's inebriated ad-libs in Jaws.
Here's to swimming with bow-legged women.
Pippin and Merry reprise their Green Dragon drinking song, while Gandalf watches Pippin closely, remembering Pippin's little moment with the Palantir before. Like sponsor Sam watching the addict Frodo, Gandalf is watching this new addict of Pippin, because Gandalf knows it is really just in our nature to fail. Sméagol speaks to his Gollum reflection in the water, and while this concept is less elegant than the simple intercutting of their dialogue in Two Towers, the water sets up the visual reveal of Gollum dropping the stone in it to reveal Sam sneaking up behind him, dropping eaves. The Weta artists had more time to work on Gollum between movies 2 and 3, and they added more texture to Gollum's eyes based on Andy Serkis's emotions, which you can really see when he alludes to Shelob.
Patience, my love. First, we must lead them to her.
Sméagol had also said they'll steal the ring for me, and Gollum corrects, for us, setting up the fact that Sméagol even plans to deceive his own Gollum identity. Meanwhile, Éowyn tells Aragorn about her dream.
I dreamed I saw a great wave climbing over green lands and above the hills.
Speaking of swimming with bow-legged women, it's because she's a horse girl, that's all. I'm sorry. She is referencing the great wave that swallowed Númenor, Aragorn's doomed ancestral homeland. In the book, the chapter The Steward and the King, it's Faramir who brings up this vision to Éowyn, and we actually see this as a premonition in the Rings of Power series. Tolkien himself had a recurring nightmare of a giant wave swallowing him just like this, and that's what inspired the calamity of Númenor. He called this his Atlantis complex. This is just a deeply important motif to understanding Tolkien. It's actually where George R. R. Martin got Winter is Coming and All Men Must Die. It's really our fear of death and failure that linger over all of us. Whereas Frodo is tempted by the ring, Pippin is tempted by the Palantir, which we see inside of Edoras here. Jackson kept Gandalf's eyes open for this because in the text there actually is this weird detail. The wizard seemed to sleep, but with lids not fully closed. There was a glitter of eyes under his long lashes. So it creates this really creepy effect because Pippin is sneaking beneath the gaze of this Maiar to link with the gaze of Sauron. Either way, he's always being watched. Pippin links with a Palantir, and it is intense because now Sauron is inside of his head. He says that the Palantir showed him Sauron's next target.
There was a white tree in a courtyard of stone. It was dead.
So, the information that Gandalf was seeking from Saruman, he now learns from Pippin and from the Palantir. Minas Tirith is next. But while we actually see the burning tree, it's interesting that Peter Jackson does not show us any image for Sauron here, and it just leaves it for Pippin to explain.
I saw him.
Other than the Eye of Sauron, Sauron lives in this film only in the form of his voice, coming through the ring and through other places, and just the fear stricken on the faces of others. They even planned to have a form of Sauron fighting Aragorn at the Black Gate, but they decided at the last minute to change it and to cover it up, because that's how important Sauron's form needs to be. It cannot have any physical form, it just has to be the fear that lives in all of our hearts. To warn Minas Tirith and to get Pippin the hell out of Dodge, Gandalf splits him from Merry.
Run, Shadowfax. Show us the meaning of haste.
I love that this line did not come from Tolkien. It's just that the writers thought, what's some cool shit that Gandalf can say to the world's best horse? When Merry runs up to watch them go, he bumps past this Rohan soldier. This is actually Paul Randall, aka Tall Paul, the body double that they use for Gandalf and other actors in scenes with the Hobbit actors. This is the one time his face is actually on screen. The shot of Merry running up the watchtower started with the smaller body double for Dominic Monaghan climbing up that ladder, and then they hid the real Dominic on his knees already in that tower just waiting to pop up at the right second. You could actually see him behind the wood there earlier in the shot. Meanwhile, while making her way to the Grey Havens, Arwen envisions her future son crossing her path to a vision of an older Aragorn. Snapping her out of it is the elf played by Brett McKenzie from Flight of the Conchords after fans spotted his no-dialogue cameo at the Council of Elrond in Fellowship, and they named this character of Figwit, F-I-G-W-I-T, standing for Frodo is great, who is that? Arwen confronts Elrond, and we learn that he also foresaw this child, his grandchild, and still he sacrificed even this possibility to instead send Arwen to Valinor. Arwen begs Elrond to reforge the broken shards of Narsil into a new sword for Aragorn. This sword will be Anduril, which Elrond will bring to him later. Since it uses the same pommel as before, the pommel's inscription remains, Narsil is my name, mighty sword, Telkar made me in Nogrod. But now Elrond put a new Quenya transcription on the length of the blade, translating to, Son, I am Anduril, who once was Narsil, sword of Elendil. The slaves of Mordor shall flee from me, Moon. So it bookends with Sun and Moon, and by doing that, Elrond alludes to Telperion and Lorelin, the two trees of Valinor that were destroyed in the first stage. They provided the world with light before the sun and the moon. In the book, Aragorn carries these shards of Narsil with him from the beginning, and they get reforged before he leaves Rivendell, but they saved this story beat for a more meaningful moment in Return of the King to mark Aragorn's dramatic ascent back to return as the king. Shadowfax arrives with his pesky hitchhikers on his back, Gandalf and Pippin, to Minas Tirith, which we saw glimpses of in the previous two films' extended editions, but this is the first time we see it in its full glory. This set was actually built atop the set for Helm's Deep in the Dry Creek Quarry outside Wellington. Its design, with 4 levels of sloped streets and heraldic motifs for every house, are inspired by the Italian medieval city of Siena, with engravings on the gate inspired by the baptistry of San Giovanni in Florence, Italy. Gondorian soldiers patrol these streets with their armor designed to look like the derivatives over generations from the Númenórean armor we saw in the prologue. They pass the White Tree. Now, Peter, Fran, and Philippa admit that they didn't really have time to properly explain the backstory of this tree in the films, but this tree came from Nimloth, the original White Tree of Númenor, which itself was a descendant of Galathilion, a tree made by Yavanna as a lesser image of Telperion, as Númenor is a lesser image of Valinor, some might say. But the fact that it is not exactly Telperion is important, because this tree does not reflect the health of the elves or of Valinor. The elves do not belong to this land anyway, and they're leaving it. But rather, it reflects the health of men and our faith in each other. Right now, with Denethor in charge of Gondor, that faith is dead, and so is the tree. So they meet Denethor inside, and John Noble eats up this roll like he's gobbling tomatoes. And notice how he's not bearded, despite the description of the character in the text, but by taking away his beard, it gives us the benefit of seeing John Noble shake those jowls throughout this movie and slobber tomato juice all over that chin later. It just wouldn't have been as good if it got caught in a beard, you know? And notice how when we first see him, he is not sitting on the throne. He is on the steward's chair at the foot of the throne, which is just a quick way to visually indicate to viewers who are less familiar with this character that he is not the king, and that white throne has remained vacant. Denethor holds Boromir's split horn of Gondor, and he's so embittered by his son's death that he closes off to Gandalf's wisdom.
You think you are wise, Mithrandir. I have seen more than you know.
Mithrandir translates to Grey Pilgrim. Denethor's sight actually comes from the fact that in the novel, Denethor possesses one of the lost Palantir Scene Stones, which is how he knows about Aragorn as a possible replacement for him. Peter Jackson said that this here is one of his favorite shots, but it's not just a visual, it is what Gandalf says.
Kings made tombs more splendid than the houses of the living, and counted the old names of their descent dearer than the names of their sons.
So yes, visually it's obviously stunning. We get a full view of Gondor and where they are, and we get a sense of the scale of the city with the two actors. But notice how as he's talking about the fall of this culture, it is gliding up the edifices of each of these buildings and their heraldry, casting them as tombs, like we are looking at a graveyard for houses that were more focused on their pasts than on their living present, on their sons. And if you think about it, that is a choice that Arwen makes. She chooses her future son over the fear that the past will repeat itself. And then Peter Jackson glides past the outthrust battlement as if to suggest that these lords of Gondor have taken a spiritual dive off this ledge, as we will see Denethor literally do later in the film, because he's so entombed in the past. And despite Mordor being implied throughout these films as some faraway land, here in this shot, they see it is right next door. Mount Doom is visible just on the other side of this ridge, its shadow spreading to Minas Tirith as Sauron is using the ash of the volcano to block out the sun to make it easy for the orcs to march toward them. So geographically, the surviving parts of the Fellowship are now coming back together in this final conflict. They're all fighting pretty much on the same battlefield. Frodo stops suddenly, worried he'll never return home, as Sam turns back to encourage him to move forward. This scene was designed to structurally mirror the cornfield moment in Fellowship, when Sam stopped outside the Shire and said if he took one more step, he'd be further away from home than he's ever been. And Frodo turns back to urge him forward. They encounter this headless statue of an old king of Gondor, and when the sunlight shines on it, for a moment, the flowers brighten.
Mr. Frodo, look, the king has got a crown again.
Now, what's interesting is Frodo says this line in the book, not Sam, but Frodo in this moment of the film is just in a much more hopeless state. Tolkien never identified who this king was. Some thought it might be Isildur, but Isildur never reached old age. Some think it could be Eärnur, who would be the last king of Gondor, the one who left the throne vacant, who was indeed a fallen king, who was lost in Minas Morgul, but he also didn't reach an old age, so it's just not clear. Really, it's just implied to have been all the kings of Gondor. Since one of them has abandoned the post, the whole lineage is effectively dead and without its head. In this scene with Gandalf and Pippin looking out from Minas Tirith, we get an expositional battle map of Osgiliath along the river as the Haradrim march with Mumakil and the mercenaries sail up the river with Peter Jackson cameoing as the captain on that boat. We get a deeper context of the Witch King of Angmar, which this third movie uses as part of the physical big bad threat in place of Sauron on the battlefield. The Witch King is the Nazgul who gave Frodo his unhealable wound at Weathertop, and Gandalf says,
"The one they say no living man can kill."
Yes, no living man. Got it. So Peter Jackson had the Weta team redesign the Witch King's helmet so that it less resembled Sauron. It now has these diagonal spikes that make the helmet look like a crown, a silhouette designed to strike fear in his enemies. Frodo, Sam, and Gollum pass Minas Morgul. Minas Morgul used to be the sister city to Minas Tirith before Minas Morgul was taken over by orcs. In the language of Sindarin, Minas Tirith means Tower of Watch, Minas Morgul means Tower of Dark Sorcery. Peter Jackson said that before this movie, he hadn't seen any artists having rendered Minas Morgul. He just kind of had to imagine it. So artist John Howe really had to work from scratch. John Howe said that he was inspired by the experience of having a wisdom tooth pulled out, saying that the orcs have twisted the Gondorian design so that it would reflect their kind of style. I don't know how that reflects the experience of getting a wisdom tooth pulled out, but I guess it's just what they did to the beautiful white design that was there in the jawline of Arda beforehand. These stone gargoyles look both like they are emitting demonic tongues with horns on their heads, but also as the camera pushes in, kind of looks like their heads have just been impaled by swords that are stabbing down through their mouths. Gollum shows them the secret stare, but Frodo turns toward Minas Morgul. Love of the sound is sucked out before the green beacon surges upward, which is witnessed by Gandalf and Pippin just on the other side of this ridge. The scenic geography might be the best in the third film. We see as the orcs march out from Minas Morgul beneath them, Gollum, Frodo, and Sam climb up the secret stair above, and the camera is twisting around them, reminding us of our very first shot of Gollum in Two Towers as he descended the cliffside. Really, for the first time in any of these movies, we just kind of know where everyone and everything is. We don't really need like a paper map to show us. The orc commander Gothmog sneaks the orcs across the river at Osgiliath to surprise Faramir. In the text, the name Gothmog comes up briefly as lieutenant of Morgul, but he's never really described, so Peter Jackson and the Weta artists had this idea of an orc with elephantitis as a way to heighten the orcs of this third film, which Peter Jackson felt were just less fearsome than the awesome-looking Uruk-hai of the second movie. The name Gothmog is actually shared with the leader of the Balrogs in Morgoth's army in the Silmarillion. Now, years later, in like 2021, Elijah Wood said on a podcast that some of the orc masks, not necessarily that of Gothmog, but just one of the orcs in general, was designed to look like Harvey Weinstein as a kind of fuck you for the open secret of Weinstein's reputation in Hollywood and the fact that his company Miramax wanted Peter Jackson to make Lord of the Rings as just 2 movies before New Line came in and funded the project as a trilogy. Now, the film's stunt coordinator plays the Gondorian guard who gets killed by an arrow at the riverside, and the ranger handing out weapons is Royd Tolkien, the great-grandson of J.R.R. Tolkien, and one of the few members of the Tolkien family Peter Jackson got to interact with while he was making his film. Royd Tolkien is wearing Viggo's wig for the shot. And onto the beacons. So in the book, the beacon of Amandine is actually already lit when Gandalf and Pippin arrive at Minas Tirith, but they changed it to give Pippin this brave moment so that they could show this majestic sequence. In the book, there are a total of 7 beacons, each of them atop peaks. Like, there's not one directly over the city of Minas Tirith because that wouldn't be as visible on some other side of a ridge. Now, looking at this montage, there seems to be more than 7, and the last one of these shouldn't have been visible from where Aragorn would be sitting at Edoras, but it is totally worth it the way they depict it as just another example of great scenic geography and just a way to link previously separated characters all together. Peter Jackson speculated in the commentary about the whatever 2 rangers whose assignment it would be to light each beacon to replace the wet wood in the pile with dry wood, and how excited they must have been to finally see a beacon on the other side and light theirs. Jackson said it would probably have been like a father and son team, and it would have been like a family tradition passed down through the generations. Aragorn sees the beacon from Edoras and he sprints to the Golden Hall. So why is Aragorn running so fast now when Theoden is just going to give 3 whole freaking days for the muster of Rohan to meet at Dun Harrow? Well, the sprint helps give some narrative thrust to this moment because Aragorn was just kind of like sitting there inactive for this part of the movie. In this way, it just kind of tricks the viewer to thinking Aragorn is always moving as fast as he can in motion toward his goal. And the Dun Harrow detour is just kind of how Tolkien structured things in the book. They ended up moving some things around and removing some things that they didn't have time for, and they needed to acknowledge that things were now moving forward, but not directly to Gondor because they needed to get to Dun Harrow so that Aragorn could get to the Paths of the Dead. And just having him run here just kind of makes the viewer feel like, hey, we're moving, this is great. At the end of the day, it takes time to muster, and you want to strike when your muster is the most mustered. Either way, Rohan will answer, including Éowyn, with Aragorn finding her sword tucked under her saddle. But this detail is left as a reveal in the text, but you know, it's a movie. They could really hide the fact that it was the actress under that helmet. Theoden and Merry have more of a relationship in the book, but all they had time for in this film was just this one little moment when the king makes him an official esquire. And I love how when they ride out, you can see Merry composited in, his legs too small for the horse to feel his kicks. So while all the focus in this movie goes to Minas Tirith and Pelennor Fields, the truth is Sauron's forces are also simultaneously fighting the elves in Lothlorien and the dwarves in the mountains. But kind of like the Eye of Sauron, we the viewer can only point our focus at one front at a time. Faramir's forces retreat from Osgiliath as the Nazgul Fellbeasts pick them off, leading to this Wilhelm scream. Gandalf repels the Nazgul with light from his staff, and there's this great shot where the camera is tracking behind his horse and then whip pans around, revealing the whole city of Minas Tirith, which is a visual effect created with miniatures, but the fact that it comes in at the end of this realistic, bumpy shot on horseback makes the city itself feel real as well. Faramir updates Pippin and Gandalf that he did see the halflings, Frodo and Sam, 2 days prior, giving them hope, but says that they are nearing Cirith Ungol, which in the theatrical cut would jump to Frodo climbing that part, but in the extended edition, they inserted back in this deleted scene with Faramir and Denethor, where the father says that he would have kept the ring hidden, but
not to be used unless at the uttermost end of need.
Yeah, just on that little turn on the word unless, John Noble reveals his own human weaknesses. In his anger with Faramir, he hallucinates Boromir behind him, and Sean Bean fades, and Denethor's happiness vanishes. I love this little moment because it reflects perfectly Gandalf's description of the decline of Gondor, living in glorified tombs and asking questions to the stars while neglecting their living sons. They had to remove the scene in the theatrical cut because it just made more sense to go from Gandalf asking about Frodo from Faramir and then directly to Frodo. And here we see Frodo and Sam struggling on Cirith Ungol, and according to Peter Jackson, this scene was actually shot during the shoot for Fellowship 3 years prior to the rest of the shots for Return of the King. So they caked Elijah and Sean in sweat and dirt, and they're just like, go for it. But they had to react to other stand-ins reading Gollum's lines because they hadn't cast Andy Serkis yet. And sure, while film actors often film scenes out of sequence, usually that's just like, you know, a few weeks or maybe a couple months between time. These scenes were years apart, and it's so impressive that it all works so well together. And it's partly because just this look of extreme exhaustion and, yeah, disorientation on Elijah Wood's face is what makes this scene even better, because Frodo now just kind of looks like a guy who cannot believe how far he still has to go. Lawrence Makoare plays the physical performances of both Gothmog and the Witch King of Angmar, which makes the scene where the two characters are talking pretty fun, though the voices are different actors. Craig Parker does Gothmog and Andy Serkis does the Witch King. But these two characters are important to the story because they provide the physical presence of Sauron on the ground and, yeah, in the air for this film.
What of the wizard?
I will break him.
And I love that the fires of Mount Doom are framed perfectly behind the Witch King in the shot. Another extended edition scene shows Pippin wearing Faramir's boyhood clothes, which was meant to set up Pippin's mournful song and his saving of Faramir atop the pyre later. They added this scene as a nod to Pippin's friendship with Beregond, a Gondorian soldier who was assigned to help Pippin at this point in the book. And this also would have mirrored Merry wearing Theoden's childhood armor, which is in the book. But Faramir seeing this young reflection of himself would have informed his acceptance of his father's orders to recapture Osgiliath. High above Minas Morgul, Frodo, Sam, and Gollum sleep, but Gollum, not really. I love the shot where his eyes suddenly open the moment he senses Sam falling asleep. It's clear that neither of these hobbits are getting a whole lot of sleep, and with the lack of light in this region, it's impossible for them to even know how long they've been sleeping. It could be minutes, it could be days. They don't know how much time they've been wasting and how many of their friends could be dead at this point. And if you remember at the beginning of this movie, it was Gollum who suddenly woke them and confused them. Now it's Sam waking Frodo. So Frodo just kind of wakes up in this moment feeling this ire for Sam, and Gollum preys on this sleep deprivation, choosing this as his moment when he's gonna toss the limbus bread over the cliff and framing Sam for eating it all. We see how Gollum in the ring has successfully turned Frodo against the best thing in his life.
I could help a bit. I could carry it for a while. Share the load.
Share the load. So Frodo finally turns against Sam and he makes his friend go back home.
Go home.
Yeah, did you hear that? There's a subtlest leitmotif to the Shire theme, but the melody does not complete the path that it should go on because this would not be the homecoming Sam wants. Now, book readers will know this whole part does not happen in the book. Sam never leaves Frodo's side. They go on to the next steps after this together. But Peter, Fran, and Philippa changed it so that Frodo would now have to enter Shelob's lair alone, and that is terrifying, especially for Peter Jackson, who's an arachnophobe. And they wanted there to be greater dramatic tension between the characters for when Sam comes back to rescue Frodo. So Faramir leads a Gondorian cavalry out of the city in what's essentially a death march, and even the civilians of Minas Tirith know it. Peter Jackson sneaks his kids in for another cameo in this moment. Faramir tells Gandalf, where does his allegiance lie if not here?
This is the city of the men of Numenor. will gladly give my life to defend her beauty, her memory, her wisdom.
Yes, by invoking Numenor, Faramir invokes Tolkien's apocalyptic great wave, which, remember, in the text, is Faramir's dream. Meanwhile, Denethor, eating one of the most infamous meals in all of cinema, turns to Pippin.
Can you sing, Master Hobbit?
Now, in the book, Denethor does ask Pippin to sing, and Pippin's reluctant to do so, and ultimately, Denethor doesn't make him go through with it. But co-writer Philippa Boyens went to a karaoke night with Billy Boyd and heard his singing voice and composed this haunting lament.
Home is behind the world ahead.
These lyrics are taken from one of Tolkien's poems in chapter 3 from Fellowship, 3 is Company. It's called A Walking Song, and it's mentioned in the index, and it's something that Frodo sings along with The Road Goes Ever On and On. But in this case, Frodo's walking song speaks of a hidden path, which is believed to come from Bottom's line in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. His dream was something the eye of man hath not heard, the eye of man hath not seen. The song has become so iconic that it came back in 2012's The Hobbit.
But home is now behind you. The world is ahead.
And its melody inspired Podrick's Jenny of Oldstone song in Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 2.
High in the halls of the kings who are gone, Jenny would dance with her ghost.
And while it's originally just a simple walking song, this simple Hobbit goodness is rendered bleak here in the world of men. Home is behind, the world ahead, and then all shall fade. Together, these express Pippin's fear of the unknown, his fear of the great wave, which makes his later moment with Gandalf, as he describes the gray rain curtain of this world rolling back, such a cathartic resolve of those fears. And yes, there is nothing subtle about the intercutting of Denethor sloppily eating meat and tomatoes, the juices spilling down his lips, while his son rides out to die. And you'll notice in many of these shots, the juices are darkened to look like blood on his chin. Wow, just a perfect sequence of shots. Faramir's doomed charge, Gothmog releasing the arrows, and instead of seeing those arrows land, we only see blood-red juice on Denethor's mouth, and the instrumentation just completely dropping out on Pippin seeing that final word of fade. Some believe the redness comes from the pewter plates that were used in the Middle Ages and gave lead poisoning to tomatoes, but I see the visual as just a metaphoric reflection of the older generation sacrificing and feeding on the youth in order to cling to life and power and ego well beyond their retirement age. Rohan musters their forces at Dunharrow, and Aragorn peers down the road to the Dimholt and sees a ghostly King of the Dead reaching out toward him, beckoning, calling him to his destiny. Originally, the filmmakers wanted to put a vision of Arwen here in the past to link the two characters, as in the book, Aragorn taking his path comes after advice from Rivendell in the form of Elrond's son Elohir, who quotes Elrond, "The days are short, if thou art in haste remember the paths of the dead." Instead, they add Arwen to Aragorn's dream, the moment of her death, symbolized by the shattering of the Evenstar necklace. It's interesting parallelism. Arwen foresees Aragorn's funeral in her dream, Aragorn foresees Arwen's final breaths in his. But Elrond greets Aragorn, which is a change from the book, to take the place of Elrond's sons Elohir and Eladan, and to give the reforging of Narsil into Anduril, Flame of the West, and its return to Aragorn more cinematic weight, and to inspire Aragorn to confront the ghosts of the Dimholt. Like, it means more for this sword to come directly from Elrond, someone who was there as an eyewitness to see Isildur take Elendil's hilt to sever Sauron's fingers, and to see this hilt not as a failure the way Boromir saw it, but for the potential still contained within. Elrond says in Quenya, so when Aragorn grew up in Rivendell, he had a secret identity named Estil, which translates to hope. So his mother gave up her son to his destiny of leading the Dunedain and reclaiming Gondor. So she gave hope to men, but Aragorn, knowing the failures of his bloodline, had less confidence in himself. Now we see a contrast between Denethor of Gondor and Theoden of Rohan when it comes to paternal priorities, as Theoden heads off into hopeless battle while leaving Edoras for Éowyn to rule after his death. So in this case, the old man does not send out the younger generation to die, he recognizes that his time is up and he encourages the youth to feel hope for a better future. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli ride on the road to the Dimholt, and Legolas explains the history of the men of the mountain who swore to come to the aid of the last king of Gondor but abandoned him and were cursed by Isildur to never rest. Meanwhile, Theoden denies Merry the opportunity to join the fight, but Merry is scooped up by Éowyn, disguised in armor. Now, in the book, Éowyn disguises herself as a completely different identity, a soldier named Durnhelm, whom neither Merry nor the reader know is Éowyn until the exact moment, "No living man am I," when she faces down the Black Rider. But the filmmakers felt that this would just be impossible to hide Miranda Mato's face under the helmet, and Merry obviously would have recognized her. But as for how Éowyn got away with this masquerade, at least in the book, Tolkien actually included a really clever line that I always love. In the Ride of the Rohirrim chapter, quote, "There seemed to be some understanding between Durnhelm and Elfhelm. He and all his men ignored Merry and pretended not to hear if he spoke." And I think we can assume from that line that the other writers actually knew that Éowyn and Merry had joined the battle and chose to honor that secret out of respect for these two to join them in death. Aragorn leads Legolas and Gimli to the King of the Dead, and I love how, from afar, he initially just looks like the ghost of a man in all of his normal flesh, but as the camera pushes in on him closer and closer, the longer he talks, his skin gives way to the layers beneath, all the way down to the bony skull. Peter Jackson said that Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl had come out earlier in the year of 2003, and he couldn't help but be a little impressed and a little jealous of the similar ghostly visual effects of that film. But really, I think it's not so much of the VFX technology or the artistry from Weta, it's really just because that Black Pearl scene uses moonlight so effectively and the way that they transition in and out of the ghostly forms, and Jackson just has to rely on no natural light, only this otherworldly green light that comes from within, as opposed to from above. So Aragorn meets the King of the Dead sword with Andúril.
That line was broken. It has been remade.
I love it. The words apply both to the linear shape of the sword and to the bloodline of the kings of Gondor. Andúril is such an insanely long sword that Viggo Mortensen couldn't carry it in a sheath at his hip without a dragon on the ground. But its length is not just a spectacle, it's incredibly important to the symbolism of this moment. Because notice how it creates this powerful diagonal visual in frame.
Fight for me, and I will hold your oaths fulfilled.
And notice how Jackson pulls the camera back and back and back on the blade, and we never see its tip, to suggest that Isildur's bloodline stretches on and never dies. Jackson said that the Ghost Army presented a major narrative challenge while they were writing the screenplay, because an invincible immortal force would kind of rob the Battle of Pelennor Fields of some dramatic tension. So their solution was to just kind of end this scene differently from how it ends in the books, where in the books, the ghosts end up chasing Aragorn and the larger group of riders out of the mountain and then kind of capitulate to joining him. Here, we just kind of end with the city crumbling into this cascade of skulls, I guess representing all the venturers in years past that these ghosts have killed. But these skulls that were seen only in the extended edition were actually shot by Peter Jackson not only after the theatrical version had released, but after Return of the King won its Oscars the following year. So think about that. Not just post-Oscar VFX spruce-ups or adding back in deleted scenes or archive footage, as they often do for DVD and Blu-ray releases, but this was entirely new production that was shot for a movie after it already took home Hollywood's top prize. That's how much these filmmakers cared about these films and these extended editions, and why we should consider the extended editions the real definitive vision of the directors. Now, everybody's house has a junk drawer full of loose batteries, and most of us have an underwear drawer that's the same way. Underwear from years ago, with no elastic left, or a pair the dog got to, or some you got for Christmas. It's the Wild West, but it doesn't have to be. Upgrade your underwear drawer with MeUndies. MeUndies offers every style you could want and has so many different patterns and colors that you can get your underwear however you'd like it. Sure, everybody needs a couple of simple solid color briefs, but maybe also you want something super fun and vibrant, a lively pattern for when you're feeling peppy. MeUndies has you covered. Plus, MeUndies comes in sizes XS and 4XL, guaranteeing a flattering cut for everybody, and they're so comfortable. This fabric, it's super breathable, it's stretchy, it's super soft. I got this pair and they're now my new go-to. I'm doing laundry every 3 days just so I can keep wearing these. MeUndies also has loungewear, joggers, hoodies, onesies, socks, whatever you need to clad yourself head to toe in the most comfortable gear around. All of MeUndies products are made using sustainably sourced materials by partners that care for their workers. And if you're not happy with your first pair of MeUndies, it's on MeUndies. Good things come in big packages at MeUndies. Get 20% off your first order plus free shipping at MeUndies.com/deepdive. alive. So Faramir gets dragged back to Minas Tirith on his horse, and he's got 2 arrows in his chest, and I love this. He's brought up on a stretcher all the way up to Denethor at the top level, but now notice the arrows have been broken off. I always think about how long it must have taken them to lift Faramir all the way up, and how he probably could have gotten way better care down by the gates. And Denethor, if he really cared, could have met him down there, and I just see this as yet another example of Denethor's pomp serving no one but himself. And ultimately not really even serving himself either, because we know how he ends up. Gothmog takes advantage of this with some psychological warfare, catapulting the severed heads of Faramir's fellow riders over the walls. And these heads, plus the car-sized boulders that follow, affect the women and children most severely. Like, notice this boulder that collapses an entire balcony. You can see before it hits that, a woman holding her child on the far left among everyone else there who are clearly civilians. And you know none of them survived this. So Denethor has a mental breakdown. He ignores Pippin saying Faramir is still alive, and he just starts to tell everyone to flee, but then...
Prepare for battle!
Yes, this is not a line from Tolkien, but it is a Hollywoody cheer line that properly catapults Gandalf into taking charge of the defense strategy. And I believe whether you're watching the theatrical version or the extended edition, this line right here, I believe is the midpoint of the movie. So the Gondorians meet the catapults with trebuchets, flinging chunks of freaking masonry from the collapsing city since they wouldn't have other artillery to use. And it's such an insane concept if you think about it. Like, they're fighting with pieces of the buildings and homes of the city that they are trying to save. And when we see the biggest chunk crush, it looks like 20 or so orcs, it's like, sweet, we got him with our chapel. Remember, Gandalf had dismissed this same masonry as just glorified empty tombs. So he has literally brought the city back to life to defend itself. Now, Jackson called this shot, tracking the big block, his Pearl Harbor shot, referring to Michael Bay's shot tracking the bomb dropping out of the Japanese plane and slamming into the warship in the 2001 film Pearl Harbor. The filmmakers had the challenge of contrasting this battle with Helm's Deep, since they're both sieges of orcs versus men, so they set it during the daytime with no rain in this instance, and they avoided things like ladders and a ton of arrow fire, as those elements were so iconic from the Helm's Deep battle in Two Towers. You'll also notice they mix in different phases, like a wave of aerial threats, the swooping fell beasts. While with their claws they're only physically useful in grabbing a few men at a time, notice how Pippin and the others grab their ears whenever they screech. The idea is that these fell beasts, and even the design of the Witch King's new helmet, is meant to strike fear and reapply this kind of psychological warfare. And Gothmog calls in Grond, the huge battering ram that's made of black steel and in the shape of a wolf's head with a fiery mouth. It was named to evoke the memory of the ancient weapon of Morgoth from the first stage during the events of the Silmarillion, a weapon called the Hammer of the Underworld. That's why Gandalf reacts with such fear when he hears them chanting Grond, because he knows this history very well. And I always love the scale of the shot. Like, look at the orcs on the side of Grond. That just tells you how massive it is, and also how massive the beast hauling it must be. Meanwhile, Gollum leads Frodo into Shelob's lair, and notice how the cave floor undulates to be hilly and not flat, because Peter Jackson pointed out that caves in a lot of Hollywood films tend to have like flat floors, and that would not be the case here, because it's like a spider's burrow. Gollum abandons Frodo, and we start to see point of view shots of Frodo through the webbing and around corners, presumably from Shelob's eyes. So Shelob the spider was the last offspring of Ungoliant, the evil Maiar spider who, along with Melkor, aka Morgoth, destroyed the two trees of Valinor. Now, literary scholars over the year have analyzed Shelob as perhaps Tolkien's either conscious or unconscious addition to the trend of female monsters in fiction. Really, I just bring it up because, you know, it's something often discussed with like the shark's mouth in Jaws or the xenomorph design in Alien. And Peter Jackson either consciously or unconsciously borrowed from James Cameron's Aliens with this reveal shot of Shelob. Part of the cave walls just stirs in the darkness, reminding us of the xenomorph unfolding in plain sight behind the Marines and Aliens. Frodo uses the light of Elendil given to him by Galadriel to reveal this spider. Now, Galadriel, as the spider's adversary, gave him this vial, presumably knowing that he would need it to ward off this spider, but she chose not to tell him exactly what he would use it for, probably to leave Frodo with some courage. But it's just interesting to rewatch this movie and just look at how like Elrond and Gandalf and Galadriel are completely manipulating Frodo to carry this necessary evil. Now, Peter Jackson based Shelob's design on the New Zealand tunnel web spider that would show up in garden trenches when he would dig them to reenact war scenes as a kid. And as an arachnophobe himself, he said that he wanted this reveal to look like National Geographic footage that he had seen of a light pointed into a tunnel revealing only the folded up legs of a spider. The mold for Shelob's head was stricken with these tumorous outgrowths in order to imply her ancient age. Now, Frodo is initially able to cut free from Shelob's web, and he tussles with Gollum outside, but ultimately tells him,
I have to destroy it, Sméagol. I have to destroy it for both our sakes.
So the filmmakers added this beat with Gollum here, whereas the book, Frodo tells Gollum that their plans are to destroy the ring all the way back at the Black Gate. But the filmmakers felt that if Gollum knew that their plan was to destroy his precious, he would not have led them this close to Mordor. And what we get instead is this really crazy beat where Gollum just freaks out and just loses footing and goes off the cliff's edge. So Frodo is ready to pass out and die, but he runs into this angelic vision of Galadriel, who helps him to his feet to continue on his journey. And again, it's manipulation by Galadriel, because it's pretty dark when you think about it. Frodo cannot even find peace in death. These forces deny him even that peace right now. Back in Minas Tirith, while the siege rages on, Denethor just falls deeper into despair and leads this funeral procession for Faramir.
Gondor is lost. There is no hope for men.
Yes, they include a single white flower blooming on the white tree as a kind of antithesis to what Denethor is talking about, but also a confirmation that his stewardship is coming to an end as the true heir, Aragorn, is approaching with the army of the dead. Meanwhile, Frodo continues his climb up the stairs, seeing the tower beyond, and this shot was taken from one of Alan Lee's great paintings, where Shelob was depicted in the foreground, sneaking up behind Frodo. And while the moments in the cave earlier were terrifying, as if in a dream where you can't really move your legs, this moment with Shelob hunting Frodo from above silently despite her size is a more haunting moment for me. Sam, after finding the tossed Limba spread, returns to save Frodo. The fact that they based Shelob on a garden spider makes Samwise Gamgee, a gardener, the perfect hero to slay it. I'll never get over how good the VFX looks on Sean Astin grabbing her mandibles and then kicking his hobbit foot on her face. And it's crazy to think that when Sean Astin shot this scene, they had no idea what the spider would even look like. And notice how Sam doesn't use any particular trickery or clever callbacks to defeat this beast. It's really just brute force and agile evasion and never ever giving up. Yes, Frodo's elven sword can cut Shelob, whereas most other swords cannot. But Sam doesn't know that, and it's arguably the most physically impressive feat any character does in this trilogy. But Sam, thinking Frodo is dead in the webbing, mourns him.
Don't leave me here alone. Don't go where I go.
It's so sad to think that Sam all this time has just been following in Frodo's footsteps, he thinks, when lately Frodo has been following Sam's moral compass. Of course, at the Grey Havens, Frodo will eventually have to go where Sam cannot follow. Now, this orc that finds him, Shagrat, is played by Peter Tate, who also played the Corsair pirate on the ship with Peter Jackson earlier. The orcs taking Frodo is where Two Towers volume of the book comes to an end, but the filmmakers believe that without Shelob in their story, Frodo and Sam would not have enough story to fill an arc for this third full movie. And they cleverly blend this moment by transitioning from Sam mistaking Frodo as a corpse to Denethor making the same mistake with Faramir and trying to burn him and himself, funeral by cremation like the old ways. Pippin tries to stop it, but Denethor tosses him out, and they use this clever practical effect for this shot where they had Billy Boyd already in place in the foreground, and they had John Noble push the stand-in actor down out of frame in the background, just kind of timed it perfectly. Pippin runs to get Gandalf's help, and the extended edition inserts back in this scene that was removed from the theatrical where the Witch King confronts Gandalf and breaks his staff, and is distracted from killing Gandalf only by the horns of Rohan, which then lead to Theoden's big moment. They removed it because it truly does not make sense for the Witch King to not take an extra 15 seconds to kill Gandalf. But here we get Theoden's big speech and his clattering of his sword on their spears, and Howard Shore's music from Helm's Deep swells under Theoden's words.
A sword day! A red day! And the sun rises!
And after Eowyn reassures Merry, Theoden finishes.
Ride for ruin! And the world ends!
Now, these words generally come from the final page of Tolkien's Ride of the Rohirrim chapter, right before the massive Battle of Pelennor Fields chapter. But the screenwriters altered the words to add Ride for Ruin and the world's ending. And I think it's to capture the description of Theoden as immortal in the text, as only a being who didn't fear death could summon the power to inspire 6,000 riders to charge in toward the end of their lives. As these horses gallop, we are back to the giddy up right now, we're horse boys music. That's Howard Shore's Rohan theme. And of course, it has its wonderful inherent gallop that I talked about in my Two Towers deep dive. And yes, another reminder to grab one of these deep dive specific designs of the Horseboy shirt from nerdriot.shop. Meanwhile, Denethor douses himself in oil and briefly sees Faramir stir, and he thinks it's just a hallucinatory fire in his flesh, like his vision of Boromir before. But for Denethor, every time he looks at Faramir, the only thing reflected back at him are his own failures. But Shadowfax kicks Denethor back onto the pyre, and Denethor runs on fire, a distance that Peter Jackson admitted was completely absurd for someone one ablaze to be able to complete the run of. But the visual is completely worth it. We sweep back from his flaming body, plunging off the edge as we soar back over the battlefield. And sometimes you just need to link one storyline to the other in the same shot, and if it defies thermodynamics and if it looks cool, you're still gonna impress the viewer. The Battle of Pelennor Fields unleashes a wave of 20 Mumakil. I'm always amazed at the level of details on these beasts. The red war paint on their trunks and their legs, and the fact that their tusks and their ankles are wrapped in additional spikes. Notice that we don't see their bodies fill with Rohan archer arrows. They just suddenly are at one point, and it's because they removed the shots of the animals getting plugged with arrows because test audiences began to feel too much sympathy for them, likening them with circus elephants, and instead they added additional shots of the Mumakil stomping on horses so that we would hate them more. And while they seem insurmountable, Eomer gets a hero move, spearing the rider to drag the entire Mumakil down the side and to careen it into its neighbor, taking down 2 beasts and at least like 30 men with one single throw. Meanwhile, Eowyn takes down another by slashing at all 4 of its legs, a move that she was only able to do by wheeling her horse directly between its legs. That's a brave horse! Horse boys! And in their darkest hour, Gandalf assures Pippin with perhaps the most beautiful passage from Tolkien's text, saying death is just another path, one that we all must take.
The grey rain curtain of this world rolls back.
White shores, and beyond, a far green country, and to a swift sunrise.
This comes from the final chapter of the book, Frodo's experience as he sails west from the Grey Havens toward Valinor. It's impossible for book readers not to cry here because it reminds us how this all ends. But how could Gandalf know what it's like? During his own death and resurrection, was he given some divine insight on what the elves experience? Or does he just know it from legend? Whatever it is, Gandalf describes it with such calm confidence that it feels like something that could apply to anyone, any of us, when our time comes. And the relief that Billy Boyd conveys as Pippin, it's how we all feel when we learn that the Great Wave can actually just be a final curtain of rain that rolls back to reveal a silver piece on the other side. The Witch King dismounts Theoden and goes in for the kill, but Eowyn blocks him.
Do not come between the Nazgul and his prey.
This line contributes to some confusion that the beasts themselves are called Nazgul. They're not. What the Witch King was really saying is even darker, that Theoden is his prey. Eowyn beheads the fell beast and the Witch King taunts.
No man can kill me.
This comes from a prophecy from Glorfindel, who said at the Battle of Fornost, "Do not pursue him, he will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall." Tolkien may have gotten this misleading prophecy from Macbeth. We know that he wrote the Ent Sacking Isengard as a nod to it, that a prophecy doesn't protect a king from all possible fates, and in fact the wording itself omits the exact manner in which you will die. In the text, Eowyn reveals herself finally here and says, "But no living man am I, you look upon a woman, Eowyn am I." In the movie, it's much more to the point.
I am no man.
Now the scream that the Witch King emits turns some of the Mumakil away. They're like, fuck no, I'm out of here. But it's accurate to the unnatural scream that Tolkien describes in the text. A cry went up into the shuddering air and faded into a shrill wailing passing with the wind. Eowyn goes to a dying Theoden, who upon recognizing her asks if his eyes darken, which leads to this peaceful moment where he says he's headed to his father's company and won't feel ashamed, but then suddenly becomes stern for his final breath.
Eowyn.
I like that it's not a completely peaceful passing for this warrior king, because it shouldn't. Theoden should rage against the dying of the light. So the army of the dead finishes the battle by sweeping across the field, tackling a Mumakil, and then flooding into Minas Tirith. But because it would be way too convenient for these heroes to have the freaking army of the dead joining them for the final conflict at the Black Gate, the filmmakers had Aragorn release them. But they do use the character of Gimli to hang a lantern on the illogic of letting them leave.
Bad idea. Very handy in a tight spot, these lads, despite the fact they're dead.
Now, the extended edition includes the Houses of Healing. Now, the voice we hear singing is Liv Tyler as Arwen, which the writers felt was Arwen singing to Eowyn how hard it is to love someone. Now, Howard Shore composed this melody, and it has this ethereal quality to it, perhaps because the chord progression toggles between B major and G major, and each phrase ends on an F sharp, which is the note that both of these chords share. And it's kind of like Aragorn drifting between the two women who love him. At Cirith Ungol, Shagrat, Gorbag, and the others feud over Frodo's belongings, a brawl that clears enough of them for Sam to be able to sneak in and attack.
That's for Frodo! And for the Shire! And that's for my own Gavin!
Sam's old gaffer refers to his father, Gaffer Gamgee, aka Hamfast Gamgee. The extended edition adds in the insert of Frodo's mithril chainmail being taken away to set up the chainmail appearing in the extended edition Mount the Sauron scene that's coming up. Sam hands back the ring necklace, but there's this little moment where it looks like it's tempting Sam.
Give me the ring, Sam.
Now, Frodo is actually helping Sam here by keeping this highly addictive token out of his possession. Like, get out of here, Sam, you don't want no part of this shit. I think we can see this moment as taking place all within Frodo's mind. Like, Sam may just be pulling it back because he's worried about hurting Frodo by giving it back to him. Not because he's under its spell, but Frodo doesn't care. He just sees what the ring will do to his friend if he doesn't hand it back to him. So Aragorn and the rest plot to draw out Sauron's army of 10,000 orcs in Mordor to keep the Eye of Sauron fixed on them and blind to all else that moves.
Certainty of death, small chance of success. What are we waiting for?
Now, the theatrical version of the film then cuts to Aragorn riding out, but the extended edition inserts back in Aragorn using Denethor's Palantir to taunt Sauron into combat. A scene originally intended to set up a one-on-one duel between Aragorn and Sauron that ended up being altered for the final cut of the film. And Sauron, in this moment with a Palantir, would scare Aragorn with the image of Arwen dead, and Aragorn's even star shatters. Also put back into the extended edition was a scene with Eowyn and Faramir to set up them being together at the coronation, and this subplot with Frodo and Sam accidentally swept up with a group of orcs headed toward the Black Gate. The absence of this sequence in the theatrical cut is part of why Frodo and Sam's march toward Mount Doom at this point in the movie just seems so unencumbered. That wasn't always the original plan, they just took it out for the theatrical cut because they had to just expedite their final march. So we see how, of the three films, Return of the King suffers the most in the translation from the text to the director's cut of the film, and then to the theatrical cut of the film. The filmmakers could not include characters who only now join the narrative in the book, so unfortunately removed was Prince Imrahil of Dol Amroth and his swan knights and 700 men to defend Minas Tirith. And even among the scenes that they wrote and shot, they just had to remove those as well in order to get the theatrical cut close to the 3-hour mark, and they just really had to focus on the central characters. So much like Frodo and Sam, for the filmmakers, it was just a march of exhaustion just to reach the inevitable end of this process. Frodo and Sam unload their armor, and notice how Sam tosses last his pots and pans, which in Tolkien's text in the Mount Doom chapter is a much heavier moment, saying, quote, "The clatter of his precious pans as they fell down into the dark was like a death knell to his heart." Sam looks up and sees this star.
Mr. Frodo, look, there is light and beauty up there that no shadow can touch.
It's believed this is a star of Gil Orestel, the star of Erendil, the same hopeful light contained within Galadriel's phial. This moment is similarly beautiful in Tolkien's text. Quote, "The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out to the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing." And we see where Fran and Philippa pulled the passage for Sam's speech in Two Towers.
It's only a passing thing. This shadow.
The bulk of that speech came from an earlier chapter, but it's only a passing thing, the shadow. I always wondered, where else did it come from? And then I remembered, oh, it comes from this later moment when he looks up at the star. So as Frodo and Sam trudge onward, Frodo at one point swats the air, which was just a little detail that Peter Jackson took out of the book of Frodo seeing invisible flies. But Frodo is so disoriented that the Eye of Sauron spots him and he drops to the ground. And again, the filmmakers made this physical eye for the films. In the book, it's just far more of an internal concept. But this third film is the only one of the three films in which the eye moves around, like kind of a practical searchlight. And yes, I did this for the Fellowship video, and I feel compelled to explain it once more. Why couldn't the eagles have just flown them into Mordor? 4 reasons. 1, it had to be small, easy to miss hobbits walking on foot so the Eye of Sauron would not spot them, and he definitely would have spotted eagles. 2, eagles, as intelligent beings of great power, they would have been as corruptible had they held the ring as any other man or larger creature would. It had to be tiny hobbit hands. 3, the eagles had suffered casualties in past wars, and they didn't want to die, and they would have had to face the aerial Nazgul and fell beasts. And 4 was Tolkien's answer, and probably the best answer.
People run into me at the pub and ask why didn't they just fly the eagles to Mordor? It would have made the quest a whole lot easier. And I told him the same thing that I'm telling you right now. Shut up.
So, on to the extended edition only scene of the Mouth of Sauron. Perhaps the coolest scene that you can only see in the extended edition. So, as Sauron's lieutenant in Barad-dûr, it's believed that the Mouth of Sauron may have also been the questioner who tortured the words Shia and Beckons from Gollum, but in the text he's described as an evil shape. with the face of a frightful mask, more like a skull than a living head, and in the sockets of its eyes and in its nostrils there burned a flame. Weta designed a helmet that showed only his mouth, but the VFX artist digitally enlarged his mouth to be 50% bigger, just to give it a more unnerving appearance. The Kirith runes on his helm bear the words Lamin Gorthar, or Voice of the Dread Abomination, and Gorthar is a Sindarin name for Sauron, and Sauron allowed only the mouth of Sauron to utter his name. He's played by Bruce Spence, who also played the gyrocopter pilot in Mad Max The Road Warrior, and he taunts them with Frodo's mithril.
Know that he suffered greatly at the hands of his host. Who would have thought one so small could endure so much pain?
And you know what? Even though he doesn't realize it, the mouth of Sauron ain't wrong. Who would have thought a small hobbit like Frodo could endure that much pain? The fact that Frodo can endure this much pain is the only reason these characters survive. But Aragorn, out of anger, cuts negotiation short. The mouth of Sauron is perhaps the most well-known difference between the theatrical cut and the extended edition, perhaps because he's such a memorable image, but his taunts work so well in the book because at this point in the book, you haven't heard from Frodo and Sam in a while, and you begin to think that Frodo might actually be dead. But restructured chronologically for the film, intercutting with Frodo and Sam throughout, the mouth of Sauron just doesn't work as well. Meanwhile, the eye of Sauron is successfully diverted to the Black Gates, and its 10,000 orcs march out to greet Aragorn's army. Many of these extras were actually played by the New Zealand army, so Viggo Mortensen clearly is just kind of hamming up his speech to win over these gruff guys. And the speech is so good.
A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day.
Supposedly, part of this speech paraphrases the 45th stanza of the Old Norse poem Voluspa, which describes Ragnarok, the end of the world. Thusly, brother shall strike brother, and both fall. Parents shall defile their kin. Evil be on earth, an age of adultery, axe time, sword time, of splintered shields, a wind age, a wolf age, till the world caves in. But I love how this speech is an antithesis to Theoden's speech before the Ride of the Rohirrim. Remember, Theoden had shouted, "Spears shall be shaken, shields shall be splintered, a sword day, a red day, ere the sun rises. Ride, ride for ruin, and the world's ending, death!" Theoden embraced the apocalypse like a Norse god himself, but Aragorn, who knows his destiny is to rule Gondor as king after this battle, and will marry someone who gave up the life of an immortal, Aragorn knows that he has to inspire these men by evoking images of the apocalypse, but then promise that today is not that day. They end up surrounded, and Gimli and Legolas prepare for the end, and I just have to include this moment because I love it.
Never thought I'd die fighting side by side with an elf.
What about side by side with a friend?
I could do that.
As Howard Shore plays this sweet whistle theme to evoke the Shire, Sam asks Frodo if he remembers home and the taste of strawberries. Strawberries! I feel like Bill and Frank eating fresh strawberries in HBO's The Last of Us during the apocalypse had to have at least been a nod to this wonderful little detail of the ultimate love between partners. But Frodo doesn't remember that taste.
I can't recall the taste of food. No, the sound of water, the touch of grass.
Essentially, Frodo has become Gollum now, because remember, earlier in the movie, Gollum said this.
And we forgot the taste of bread, the sound of trees, the softness of the wind.
But Sam declares the words directly from Tolkien's text that perfectly encapsulate true friendship.
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you.
I love this line. It's a lesson in empathy and something sponsors of those suffering from addiction could tell us quite a bit about. It is impossible to truly walk in another person's shoes, to know exactly what demons they're fighting day to day as well as they know them. But the best we can do is not claim to just cure them from their demons, but to accept the fact that they will always be fighting those demons, and while they do, to hold them up to help them face them. And Sean Astin himself actually hoisted Elijah Wood up onto his shoulders and took a few steps. Woof! Aragorn steps forward, briefly entranced by Sauron's whispering. Originally, Viggo's eyeline would be locked on an actual physical presence of Sauron here on the field that he would have had to duel in this final battle, except that it would not have been the Sauron we saw in the Fellowship prologue, it would be Anatar, a word that in Quenya means Lord of Gifts. Anatar is the unbelievably handsome form of Sauron that he took during the Second Age as he deceived the elves and convinced everyone to forge the 19 Rings of Power while keeping the most powerful 20th one for himself. This is the period of history that's being explored in the Rings of Power. But the filmmakers removed Anatar, Sauron from the sequence but as viewers not familiar with the book lore would probably expect that 14-foot tall version of Sauron that we saw in the Fellowship prologue, and might have been a bit confused by this random sexy stranger fighting familiar sexy Vigo. So they smartly kept Sauron's representation as just the eye spotlight, and you'll notice throughout the final battle, since they had pretty good fight footage of Vigo, they painted over the thing he was fighting, which would have been a Sauron stunt actor, with just this large armored troll. But before we get to this fight, Aragorn turns back to his friends with just a very, very quiet phrase.
For Frodo.
It's so perfectly delivered, and I look at these words and the tears in Vigo's eyes as Aragorn admitting to himself that the mouth of Sauron might have been telling the truth with the Mithril, that Frodo might be dead, and that would make his charge here an embrace of failure. As they approach Doom, Gollum tackles Sam and Frodo.
You swore the precious! Sméagol promised!
Sméagol lied.
I love this moment because it tells us that Sméagol, not Gollum, but Sméagol, the meek hobbit identity that Frodo thought he had won over, that Sméagol was more devious than we had thought, and that Sméagol had his own plan to outsmart even his Gollum identity. The Nazgul and the Fell Beast swoop down on the men at the Black Gate, and Gandalf once again sees the moth that he found in his bleak moment atop Orthanc and Isengard, telling us that the Eagles have finally arrived. After seeing Frodo break into a suddenly energetic sprint to the finish, it's so creepy to see him suddenly frozen at Samath Nar, the crack of doom. The necklace chain that previously helped Frodo carry this burden is now just one additional little fishing line, allowing it to dangle devilishly before him like a token used to hypnotize via a pendulum swing. The ring, like an animal lashing out in a survival instinct, hammers away at Frodo with this pulsing sound.
The ring is mine.
Oh no! After all of it, Frodo fails. He fails the same way Isildur failed, but we cannot blame either of them for their failures because the ring is just that powerful. It's Tolkien acknowledging that some evils are just too absolute for any one being to overcome alone. And that's why I believe that Gollum's final attack is the best possible end for this ring. The being who had suffered the most from it is the only one committed and crazy enough to violently sever it from its master. If not for Gollum in this moment, the ring would have returned to Sauron or would have been lost to the ages to be found again, restarting the cycle of destruction. This is what Tolkien was really getting at with Gandalf's pity of Bilbo line into Frodo back in Fellowship. Gollum was spared historically so that this ring would never leave Doom. Gollum finally gets his precious, and I just love this shot of his smitten relief as the digital camera pulls back up through the ring from above. It's a practically impossible shot for a practically impossible moment that none of these characters thought would ever happen, but here we are. And notice that this moment is the one time in the entire trilogy that Gollum stands on just 2 feet. Andy Serkis suggested that this would be one way to show the ring empowering Gollum in these final moments. And whenever Peter Jackson suggested, hey, why don't we try to blow up this scene with Gollum standing? Serkis said, no, we have to save it for this moment in Doom. Now, in the book, Gollum dances with joy and trips into the lava. Some have interpreted that as a random act of drunk power and carelessness that brought about the ring's destruction, while others point to Tolkien's letter number 192 to suggest that the god of this world, Eru Ilúvatar, intervened in this moment to make Gollum trip. Tolkien wrote, the other power then took over. The writer of the story, by which I do not mean myself, that one ever-present person who is never absent and never named. But others have interpreted that the other power that Tolkien refers to in that letter does not mean Eru himself, but really just the general force of goodness that permeates all of us, or most of us. And you could say that that goodness is represented in Frodo choosing to fight for good to counteract Gollum's act of evil to retake the ring. Because it really did piss off some book readers that Peter Jackson had Frodo leap at Gollum and tackle him. And that's what caused Gollum to lose his footing. But I respect Jackson's choice to represent this goodness in one character, as these films hadn't really given physical representation to any godly forces. But you know what? I wouldn't have minded if Sam made that final tackle instead, but I have to say that this decision gives Frodo one moment of redemption. After everything we've seen Elijah Wood go through, we can't just end with him being a complete failure. So Frodo tackles Gollum over the edge, and notice how Gollum does not even care the moment he's in free fall, and he hugs the ring to his chest. That's how distracting it is for him. It blinds him to his other circumstances, and it means that for Gollum, the sensation of holding the ring is such a rush that it feels like a free fall. But Gollum plunges into the lava, but the ring does not follow him down initially. The lava hardens around it, as if the ring is resisting its death in one final grasp. The elvish runes illuminate. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness, bind them! It's as if the ring is looking up, waiting to see if Frodo gives up and falls in too, so that it can get the last laugh as the one ring to rule them all. But Frodo chooses life. He reaches for Sam's hand, and at that moment the ring says, okay, no way out, and then it melts into the lava. So with the ring destroyed, the last vestiges of Sauron are vaporized, so the Eye of Sauron atop Barad-dûr collapses, and I love how you can hear his scream. Peter Jackson said with the spectacle he was going for something of biblical proportion, like the collapsing of the Tower of Babel, or the parting of the Red Sea in the Ten Commandments. But the ground collapsing and the swallowing of only the orcs, I think, is my least favorite aspect of these films. It was clearly just done for efficiency's sake, as filmmakers had already decided to bypass the scouring of the Shire. But as we watch it, we just have to wonder, why not just have a lower number of orcs to a more realistic, manageable number, yet still have our heroes at a moment of defeat down to like double digits on both sides, but then boom! Seeing the Eye of Sauron collapse gives our heroes the last bit of strength to finish off the rest. That seems like it would be something that they could shoot, right? But the reason why Peter and Fran and Philippa didn't do that is simple. Exhaustion. Creative exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, and well-earned exhaustion. Peter Jackson said that they were so rushed in shooting this part of the movie that he forgot to even get reaction shots of Frodo's victory, and that these great shots of Billy Boyd and the rest crying when Doom explodes, all that had to be grabbed in pickups. We forgive Return of the Kings of its convenient earthquake, because this climax of the film and the trilogy as a whole do so many other things well that we're able to forgive them of their failures and their shortcomings and not even see them as failures. Frodo and Sam face what they think is the end as lava pours around them.
Glad to be with you, Samwise Gamgee. Here at the end of all things.
There is a subtle alteration from Tolkien's text where Frodo instead says, I am glad you are here with me here at the end of all things, Sam. So instead of it being an honor to have a Sancho Panza at his side, here in the film, Frodo considers it an honor for him to be at the side of the film's true hero, Samwise Gamgee, and he uses his full name like Sam is the kind of hero you would hear about in stories. Like you can see Frodo already starting to plan the final paragraphs that he's going to use to finish Bilbo's text. Peter Jackson puts in this fade to 5 seconds of black to really make the viewer feel like this truly is the end, which for viewers who weren't familiar with the book or with the story did set many of the people who saw this movie to think that this movie had too many endings. Peter Jackson interestingly has said that those fans were never really into The Lord of the Rings and were just kind of dragged there by family members. But interestingly, his wife Fran Walsh has said maybe we didn't do proper expectation management and could have done a better job. It's interesting when you listen to the director and screenwriter commentary, they kind of debate over who really deserves the responsibility for the way the audience interpreted the ending of this film. But after 5 seconds, we fade back up on the eagles arriving, which Peter Jackson said was inspired by a John Howe painting. But the way Jackson frames it as the eagles looking like angels from heaven coming to rescue the hobbits from a lava-covered hell is an image that I'll never forget. It just looks so cool. As the clouds cover Frodo's face, we fade to white, dissolve to him recovering in Rivendell, reuniting with the Fellowship. Back in our Fellowship video, we pointed out how Legolas saying, "And you have my bow," are the only words exchanged between Legolas and Frodo in the trilogy. And oddly, as each Fellowship member arrives in the room, Frodo says each of their names, but with Legolas he's like, and you.
Gandalf? Gimli!
But yes, Frodo does know Legolas's name. In the book, he's weirdly obsessed with the elf, and when he looked in Galadriel's basin, remember who he saw? Legolas, randomly. Onto the coronation. Aragorn, now Elisar, is crowned by Gandalf with this crown that uses the leaf design of the Númenóreans that we also saw in the Gondorian armor, and they added Arwen's even star on the engravings on the side, while on the front, right above the forehead, is the white tree of Gondor, forked into 2 branches, which I believe represent the 2 trees of Valinor, Telperion and Lorelin. And both of these trees live on in the white tree that you'll notice in the background is now back to full health. In Tolkien's text, we actually follow King Elisar as he plants a sapling version of this tree in Gondor. Elisar sings. Now, Viggo Mortensen composed this melody himself using the Elvish that Aragorn speaks in the book. The lyrics translate to, "Out of the great sea to Middle-earth I am come. In this place I will abide, and my heirs unto the ending of the world." These are the same words that his ancestor Elendil spoke when he first arrived in Middle-earth from Númenor. Isildur died in the water, and the Great Wave was an apocalyptic dread that loomed over all these ancestors, but here now Aragorn is conquering it. When Aragorn sees Arwen, what always gets me is Elrond behind her, tears in his eyes. Now yes, he is a father giving away his daughter to what will become a marriage, and he is still coming to terms that she is giving up her immortality. But think about it, Elrond is also seeing the Númenórean line reforged, and the heartbreak he has felt for thousands of years from Isildur's failure, now finally redeemed by Isildur's descendant. Elrond can now rest easy, knowing that the last alliance, and before it, the Great Wave, were not in vain. The hobbits bow, but the king says,
"My friends, you bow to no one
And for the first time, the hobbits are the tallest ones in sight. And I love that it's all 4 of them, because sure, while Sam and Frodo probably deserve this respect more than the other 2 do, Merry and Pippin both made bold sacrifices themselves. Pippin lighting the beacon, Merry stabbing the Witch King, both of them being the first to charge in after Aragorn said for Frodo. Their heroics were more visible to everyone in attendance here. If anything, people would be like, who are Sam and Frodo? Minas Tirith cross dissolves into the location on the map in Frodo's book, and we rewind through the stops we've made on this journey, back through Rohan and Helm's Deep, to Isengard and the Fangorn Forest, to Lothlorien, to the Misty Mountains in Rivendell, Weathertop and Bree, and then finally back to the Shire. Now, Tolkien's text at this point moves on to the Scouring of the Shire, in which Saruman and the orcs invade and occupy the Shire, and the heroes must fight to reclaim their homes and liberate their fellow hobbits. But by omitting that from the film, the filmmakers produce this so very true experience of returning to one's hometown, expecting a hero's welcome, only to find the familiar faces completely unimpressed by the returners' exploits. Tolkien was a veteran of the First World War and had the experience of returning to his hometown, along with all the other soldiers, and just being unable to talk to their neighbors about what they had really gone through. And that's what we see with the 4 hobbits here. They're not able to enjoy in the simple pleasures anymore. After declaring wanting to marry Rosie Cotton when they were doomed in the lava, Sam now makes his move in the Green Dragon, and Pippin's look of disappointment that the pints are now back to normal size lists to see Sam now on a hero's journey of his own, the journey of marriage and family, a journey that Frodo can never take part in. So after the wedding, we see Frodo from behind, finishing Bilbo's book. There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Tale, amended to include The Lord of the Rings by Frodo Baggins. Now, this shot of him from behind is the same framing that we saw of Bilbo in the beginning of Fellowship, because we are back to this being a story about stories. Frodo, within his own story, recognizes that Sam is the more heroic figure, because notice how he ends his final line with Sam as the hero. As Sam joked at the end of Two Towers that he might be mentioned in the book someday, but now Frodo writes that Sam was elected mayor of Hobbiton, and asking for Rosie's hand was, quote, the bravest thing he ever did. What an honorable thing to let your best friend's wife live on in legend as his most courageous adventure, knowing what you know about the trouble the 2 of you actually got into. Because I can tell you now, as a married man, despite the thrills and terrors I've endured as a bachelor, nothing is as scary or as rewarding as married life. Now, despite it being the same framing as Bilbo from the beginning of Fellowship, notice how the filmmakers tried to mute the colors and dim the shot to illustrate how Frodo is older and dying from his unhealable wound that he received at Weathertop. Fran Walsh admits that they might have failed to fully convey that this story is supposed to be about the destruction of Frodo, and Peter Jackson admitted that viewers in these minutes might just be too under the spell of what he called the bladder effect. And it's just interesting to hear that they're so humble when they talk about these amazing films. So on the ride to the Grey Havens, Bilbo asks,
Is there any chance of seeing that old ring of mine again?
I'm afraid I lost it.
Oh. Did you?
And I kind of see this as a more stated version of Bilbo's jump scare back in Fellowship. Remember that one? But instead, this is a more haunting version, as just something creepy that an older relative who has dementia might just say to you. Like, think about it, how haunting it is for Frodo that even deep into old age and dementia, the burden of being a ring bearer is something that never leaves you. And I think this is a moment when Frodo knows he cannot stay. So at the Grey Havens, you'll notice Gandalf is wearing a new ring. This is Narya, one of the 3 elven rings of power, previously worn by Gil-galad until his death. Galadriel and Elrond wear the other 2 rings of the elves. Narya is the ring of fire, fitting for the Maiar who slayed Durin's Bane. For mortals like the hobbits to join the elves on the westward voyage toward Valinor, it would mean physical death, but spiritually it would be the words Gandalf described to Pippin, what Tolkien described here at this point in the 3rd to last paragraph of the book. White shores and beyond, a far green country under a swift sunrise. Frodo hands Sam the book.
The last pages are for you, Sam.
Frodo is admitting that he is unable to tell the full story because he cannot be the lord of it all. None of us can be the lords of our own narratives. Narratives are something that are meant to be shared with generation after generation. And while Frodo has been made pale and sick in these final minutes, notice in our final close-up as he turns back to smile at his friends, the color has returned to his face. I've identified this as the anecdotal accounts of loved ones on their deathbeds having a flash of consciousness right before the final moments. I believe that's Frodo here. While you could say he failed at the crack of doom, he has always been redeemed by the friendships he has forged. So the way they convey Frodo's gray rain curtain rolling back is dissolving into white. Now in the book, Sam lingers long after Merry and Pippin leave, watching the sun go down and just standing alone at dusk. But here, we see Sam returning home. Sam's daughter, Eleanor, is actually played by Sean Astin's real-life daughter, Allie, and you can see the love in this papa's face as he finally picks up his daughter. Rosie actor Sarah McLeod is holding baby Frodo, played by McLeod's actual baby daughter, Maisie. The circular door closes behind Sam as we hear him say,
Well, I'm back.
Of course, the same words that Tolkien closes the novel with. There and back again. this is this Hobbit's tale. And since this film ends the full trilogy, the filmmakers brought in some real artsy credits, supplying artist Alan Lee with photographs of the cast for him to illustrate. I kind of feel like this is meant to be Sam and his kids drawing the heroes from the story in the margins of the book that Sam has now inherited from Frodo. The music is Annie Lennox singing Howard Shore's Into the West, as Peter Jackson felt that this trilogy should end with the voice of our real-world Galadriel, whom Annie Lennox totally is, to mirror Galadriel's voice, bringing us into the trilogy in the Fellowship prologue. To end on a personal note here, it's pretty eye-opening for me to revisit Return of the King and to hear the filmmakers talk about it as the story of their creative failures and their sacrifices, their exhaustion that accidentally made its way onto screen. Because I only see this trilogy as a complete masterpiece, Return of the King included. But as I've tried to break down these movies for you, this process of analyzing them made me feel exactly the same way. Last November, my plan was to release all 3 of these videos during the 2023 holiday season. I thought I could spend a week writing and shooting each one of these, which is my normal cadence for deep dive videos, and then, pack it in for Christmas break and our son being born, and then rest on my laurels on a successful, prolific year 1 of the deep dive channel. And then, I'd hit it hard on the other side of my paternity leave. But that didn't really happen. While I could say that life had other plans, when I look back on it, it was just me. I totally failed. Around mid-November, I completely hit a wall. I burned out. These movies and the source material they're based on, they're just so dense and so beloved and so connected to everything in fantasy literature and pop culture that I just couldn't rush these or half-ass them. And while I did these, I just got completely lost in the lore, and I've never felt so creatively exhausted while trying to make YouTube videos. And while doing this, I felt like I had completely failed my coworkers, and I felt like I had completely failed all of you who have been so generous in subscribing to and watching Deep Dive channel videos. Like all of my plans that I initially pitched this channel to be to you all. I felt like I had been compromising on that vision until there was no vision left. Like, what was I thinking? Promising weekly extended movie analyses plus other new exciting formats while still being a host on the new Rockstars channel and appearing on the Break Room channel? Why did I feel like I had to prove myself so much? So it was so therapeutic for me to hear Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens admit the same thing, as they felt that they had to rush to finish The Return of the King at any cost and sacrifice what they really wanted to do and feel like failures, all while we were watching Frodo do the same thing, destroy his own body to fulfill his quest and fail at the moment of truth. But at the end of the day, none of us should be defined by our failures. And this process has been such a healthy reminder to me that we are all human and it's okay to fail sometimes, because no one is as harsh of a judge of our own failings as ourselves. And everyone else is only gonna assess us by how we move forward. So how will I move forward from this? I'm still gonna do 1 extended film analysis video per month on this Deep Dive channel. At least I'm going to try to. And you know what? Every single video I do, I'm gonna make it so damn good. But you know what? That's all you can expect from this Deep Dive channel. I'm sorry if you subscribe to it expecting more, but I feel like 1 big hour-long video per month is plenty. And I'm gonna announce what series I'm gonna be doing next very soon, but I think you're gonna love it. Meanwhile, my main focus will continue to be on new Rockstars and the Break Room, and ultimately, above anything on YouTube, my main mission is to write other, more important chapters of my story. Launching the Deep Dive channel over a year ago was brave, but there's something else that was the bravest thing I ever did. So thanks for watching. Well, I'm back.